Through Crisis Summer Series presented by Michigan State University's Broad College of Business. My name is Marcy Stoll, Assistant Director of Executive Development at MSU. Today, we are considering high stress environments and how that impacts teams. It's a time in our lives where most teams are under high stress, more than typical years where some teams are under high stress. So Dr. Riley has generously agreed to come share with us her insights on how to be part of a high stress team, taking care of yourself, and also how to lead a team that's under high stress, how to take care of your team members. So after her 30-minute presentation, I will share your questions with her. So please use the Q&A feature in Zoom to submit your questions throughout the presentation. I will share as many as time allows with Dr. Riley. And we're also going to offer a poll mid-presentation that reinforces an excellent teaching point. So please engage with that if you like. After we conclude today, we will provide you a link to the recording, which will be posted on the Broad YouTube channel. Now, I'd like to introduce Dr. David Frayer, the Assistant Dean of Outreach and Engagement. Dr. Frayer, thank you for being here today, and thank you for all you do to manage our team as well as support this summer series.
Well, thank you so much, Marcy, and thank you for everything that you're doing to make this series possible. This has been a tremendous experience. I've really enjoyed all of these sessions and the opportunity to engage with so many of our alumni and other colleagues around the state, around the nation, and the world. So thank you for everything that you've done to make this possible. On behalf of Dean Gupta and our entire team in the Broad College of Business here at Michigan State University, I'd like to welcome all of you to the latest in our series this summer concerning managing through crisis. Really excited to have Dr. Tina Riley with us today. Tina is with the School of Human Resource and Labor Relations here at Michigan State University. She has been a tremendous colleague to us. We have collaborated for many years on multiple programs, bringing her unique perspective and experiences to bear in a variety of our programs that we run internally with our colleagues here at Michigan State University. I think I've mentioned in the past, we have a few leadership institutes that we do for our colleagues here within the university, but also for external clients and other organizations who are really trying to enhance their capabilities. I've commented before, one of the great challenges that we're having with the global pandemic and everything else that we're facing today is and Tina's going to address some of these things, right? We're faced by so much uncertainty and so much stress simultaneously that sometimes it can cause us to freeze and just try and deal with the immediate. But the reality is this is the time when most of our organizations probably should be stepping back and asking some fundamental questions about who we are and who we plan to be for the future. So I'd encourage any of you who may be on that journey or thinking about taking that journey with your organizations, if you would like assistance or like to engage any of our faculty and the key folks here at Michigan State University who can help make that possible, please don't hesitate to reach out. Marcy is a tremendous asset and be happy to chat with you about any of those kinds of opportunities. With that said, I'd like to again welcome Dr. Tina Riley. Tina, we are so grateful that you're taking time to be with us today to share your insights and ideas about how we can deal with stress in team environments. And so welcome again, and thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Dave, and thank you, Marcy. And Marcy went over the agenda, but just to recap, we'll have 30 minutes of presentation and then the Q&A. Please submit lots of questions. I very much, Marcy and I were talking about this just yesterday. I very much want to hear your questions and have an opportunity to engage with your questions. So I appreciate your doing that. And I have to say that I was so pleased when the business school implemented this Managing Through Crisis summer series, because if there's one thing that we can agree on, right, as Dave pointed out, if there's one thing that we can agree on, it is that we are living in a VUCA world, one that is characterized by volatility, Uncertainty, think of all the uncertainty that we're experiencing right now. Complexity and ambiguity. And sometimes there's so much VUCA-ness going on in the world that it really feels like we're drinking from a fire hydrant. Our job for ourselves and for those with whom we work, and particularly as we're leading teams, our job is to slow the flow to a manageable level, to a level where we can not just survive, but thrive during this period of constant change and high levels of stress. And it's so important that we do this for our teams. And this survey really illustrates why that's so important. A survey of over 2,000 employees, and look at these figures, folks. 53.8% reported being more emotionally exhausted, right? Just over half report being more irritable, okay? And 42.9% of employees report feeling just more generally confused. All of those things taken together make teamwork even harder, makes it more challenging and more important that we find ways to de-stress ourselves, to communicate more effectively. Speaking of de-stressing, survey shows 67% of employees surveyed report experiencing higher levels of stress since the start of the pandemic. This survey, this was done in March and April. I imagine if we did it again today, we'd see even higher levels. And one thing, it's like, so there's all of this stress, and we all get that, we all know that. So why is this so critically important for us to know at work and to understand this at work? Well, when we are under high levels of stress, it literally gets harder to think. There's a physiological response that takes place in our brains when we are under high levels of stress. The prefrontal cortex, this is where complex problem solving, planning occurs, right? These higher order thinking skills, this is where this occurs. It becomes darker. There's less activity. Okay? So it is really tempting sometimes to tell people to just get over it, just move on. What's your problem? Recognize the responses that we're feeling to all of this stress. It's not just somebody being obstreperous, right? There are physiological changes that are occurring when we're under high levels of stress. And this stress, if it's prolonged, absolutely affects teams and teamwork. Okay? If you are not familiar with the 4 stages of team development, here they are. And the forming stage, this is where teams come together and we're just sort of getting to know each other. The next stage is storming. And sometimes we want to think, oh, but let's just jump over the storming stage. That's actually counterproductive. You want teams to work through the storming stage so they can learn to develop strategies for dealing with conflict, and we're going to see some of that here today. But the storming stage is perfectly normal and to be expected. That's what helps us then get to the norming stage, where we've developed group norms. And then eventually, right, we get to the performing stage. So what you may be seeing among your teams now, since we've been under this period of prolonged stress and ambiguity, and are we going to go back to work? Are we not? Marcy's poll at the beginning with who works with you from home. All of those things can really sort of throw our existing team back to an earlier level of development. This is perfectly normal. Name it. It's okay. Oftentimes, once we can name what we're going through, it's easier to deal with. So I encourage you, share this information with your teams. Let them know if you had a high-performing team who now they're struggling, right? Because maybe somebody doesn't have the bandwidth to collaborate. It makes really online collaboration much harder. Tempers are short, like we saw with the survey. Let your colleagues know that's normal. It's called the storming stage. And let's then work to develop new team norms. Maybe one of those team norms is that we're going to schedule meetings at odd hours so that if our kids are going back to school during 8 to 5 hours, we have meetings after that or during the lunch hour when the kids are not online. Develop new team norms. That will allow you and your teams to get back to this high level of performance that you very likely were at prior to the pandemic. So the question I always get asked when I teach this is, well, that's great. How do we do that? Well, communication is key. Okay? During periods of high stress, during times when everything is just so volatile, so ever-changing, and lots of ambiguity, people need to know they are valued, right? So make sure that you're acknowledging successes, right? Sometimes the success given work from home is even a pretty small success, but it's a big win. I got through an entire meeting without, for example, forgetting to unmute myself, right? We want to feel valued. Employees need to know they're valued. We need to know that we're part of a team. And if you question the relevance of that, Google work from home and isolation and see how many hits you get. It's a big problem. All of the informal conversations that we used to have just walking down the hallway at the work site, all of that's gone. So people really do need to feel that they are still part of the team, that we need to know that we're still informed. People still want to be in the loop, so keep people informed. And frankly, everyone wants to know that there's a plan. There is a plan for a desirable future and a plan for how we're going to get there. So what's the easiest way to communicate those things? Well, incorporate the 7 attributes of effective communications into your day-to-day communications. And I say this is the easiest because it's one of those things where you're not adding anything new to your to-do list. It's really tweaking what you're already doing. So when you're having conversations with those on your team, make sure that your conversations are congruent, that you are being congruent. And by congruent, we mean that you are sending one message with your words, your tone of voice, your facial expressions. So for example, if I said, and I'm going to pick on you, Marcy, here for a second. If I said, oh, that was just great poll, Marcy, nobody is going to believe that I thought that was a great poll because I'm being incongruent, right? So you want to be congruent because when we're communicating, people are paying attention not just to our words, but to the tone of voice, to the way we're saying things, to our body language and facial expressions, which you can pick up on in virtual meetings such as this. You also want to be descriptive and specific, right? Being descriptive and specific can help overcome all those feelings of confusion, right? We said that when we're under a lot of stress, the higher order thinking is more challenging. So by being descriptive, by being very specific, we can minimize misunderstandings, we can minimize unintended slights, right? We can minimize assumptions that are erroneous. So number 1, be congruent. Number 2, be descriptive and specific in your communications. And be validating. We all want to be validated, to feel like we matter, that we are an important part of the organization. So to be validating, make sure you're listening. If you're in a Zoom meeting with someone, make sure you're not trying to multitask and on your phone and just sort of nodding periodically at the person. Really look at the person, make eye contact, So they know you're paying attention. That's very validating. Folks, we are all learning through this pandemic. So when mistakes happen, and they will, when mistakes happen, focus on what do we learn from this, right? What can we take from this? And then how can we communicate and share that learning with others in the organization? You want your communications to also be two-way. There's a great quote, and I don't even remember who said it, but there's a great quote that I heard years ago that said something like, rest assured, if you are doing all of the talking, you are putting somebody to sleep. Your communications need to be two-way. You talk, you listen to what the other person says, you talk, you listen to what the other person says. You also want to be conjunctive in your communications, and this is similar to the two-way communications that I just mentioned. Conjunctive communications are where what you're saying is connected to what the person with whom you're speaking said. And if you have ever been talking with somebody and they make some comment or question that feels like it's completely out of left field, you'll know what disjunctive feels like. So you want to be conjunctive in your communications, connecting to what the other person is saying. And finally, effective communications are owned. And this is often challenging, particularly for people who are new to leadership roles. When a leadership decision, a management decision is being made, that's the time to question it. When you're saying, have we considered this? What about that? But once the decision is made, and you're responsible for communicating that to your team, you need to own that communication. Too many times we hear people who are new in their roles say things like, it's a really stupid idea, but they're making us do it. Well, recognize if you're in a leadership role, you are they, right? You are they. So you want to own it. This is what we're doing. You still want to be authentic. So you would say, this is going to be challenging, perhaps. So let's see how we can make it work, rather than making disparaging comments about it. The only time you're not going to own communications is when someone else has a great idea. Make sure that you acknowledge that. So if Dave has a wonderful idea, I'm not going to go into a meeting and say, I've got this great idea. No, I'm going to say, Dave has this great idea. So two pieces to owning your communications. All right, and keep in mind, while you are communicating with your teams, or frankly with anyone in the workplace, that all communications have three primary objectives. You want to recognize that, and you want to respond accordingly. So first of all, as you see here, it's our identity, right? And our identity is that we all want to be treated with dignity and respect. We all want to be heard, right? If someone's identity has been threatened, reestablishing that becomes paramount. That's what's driving the whole conversation. And if you've ever been in a conversation and you think you're talking about content, so you're talking about a project you're working on, and all of a sudden the person sort of disengages, right? Sits back and becomes a little disengaged, or perhaps starts trying to defend their opinion and their ideas. Those are cues to you that their identity may have been threatened. Well, to respond to that, you can acknowledge that. If you have been incongruent, right, and you were sending mixed messages, and you can tell the person might feel a little threatened by that, you can acknowledge that and simply say, I think that came out wrong, right? Or what do you think about that? You want people to feel valued. If you've ever read anything about hostage negotiations, or even frankly seen hostage negotiations on television, you'll see this reestablishing sense of identity all the time. This is where the hostage negotiator will say to the criminal, what do you want? What do you need? Giving that person a sense of control that reestablishes their sense of identity. So identity, okay, is our sense that we are valued, that we have control, that we're treated with dignity and respect. The relationship is all about what kind of relationship do you want to have with the person with whom you're speaking. Perhaps it's peers, maybe a friend relationship, subordinate and supervisor. What kind of relationship do you want to have? And then content. And this is the task at hand, the work, the project. It's the issue that you're working with. Normally at work, we're spending most of our time moving between content and relationship. Okay? Again, if you notice, if you're paying attention and you notice that somebody is exhibiting signs that their sense of identity has been threatened, address that, respond to that so that you can get back to dealing with the issue at hand or the content. And it's important to recognize that we are all unique. Right? We are all unique. Different people have different perspectives. Our experiences, our beliefs, the division of our organization where we work, our department, even the school, right? All of these impact our perceptions. And the parable of the blind men and the elephant is informative here. The parable of the blind men and the elephant is that a group of blind men encounter an elephant for the first time. The blind man who encounters the elephant's ear says the elephant is like a fan blowing in the breeze. The man who encounters the side of the elephant says, no, you're wrong. The elephant is like a wall. The third man says, you're both wrong. The elephant is like a tree trunk because he has encountered the leg of the elephant. The reality is all three are correct. All three are viewing the elephant through their own lens. We have different perspectives. Our goal is to develop a holistic understanding of the issue, of the elephant. And it's important to do this. And again, getting back to those 7 attributes, being specific and descriptive can help with this. Because when we don't know something, we make assumptions. So I'm going to ask you to help me with a little experiment. This is the poll that Marcy mentioned earlier. Take a look at these words. Write down as many of those as you can. Marcy, I'm going to ask you to make that go away for just a second. We're not quite there yet.
Yep, I did. So sorry about that. Hopefully nobody saw that little flash.
Oh, no, absolutely fine. My goodness. My goodness. All right. So write down the words. I'm going to make them disappear, folks. Going once. It's going to be interesting to see how this works. Now, pull up the poll if you would, please, Marcy. And folks, using the poll, indicate which of the words you wrote down. I love watching these responses come in. Bed seems to be an easy one to remember. Good, good. All right, responses are slowing, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. I'm going to move the poll over to the slide of my screen so I can still see it. All right, thank you for participating in our survey. This was a fun experiment. I'm going to put the words back up. So yes, good for you all that wrote down bed. Yes. If you'll notice, the word sleep isn't there. I have been using this experiment, if you will, for many years, and people always say sleep. And they say sleep for a very important reason. Our brains are pretty good at filling in the gaps. So you want to make sure that you're communicating clearly, that you're listening, that you're paying attention and being intentional in your communications, so that when people are viewing the world through their context, they're not making assumptions that are incorrect. So thank you all for that. All right, so what else can you do? I promise some specific things you can do. Here are some 5 steps to really help your teams be as successful as possible during this pandemic. First of all, check in with employees frequently. Phone calls from managers are perceived as valuable. Everything doesn't have to be a virtual meeting, right? Zoom fatigue is a real event, and many of us experiencing that. So sometimes it's a good idea to go old school and just pick up the phone. Okay, maybe not that old, but go old school, send a text message, right? Just very quickly, how are you doing, right? And listen for the response. I think many of us were really good at making sure that, we were checking in at the beginning of this, maybe back in March. Make sure you're still regularly checking in with employees, with those on your team, so they don't feel isolated, right? Make sure that they still have the resources. I was talking with one of my colleagues just the other day, and she'd been doing great, working from home on her tablet, which has now crashed. So sometimes we need to continue to check in. Do you have what you need? Right? Can we provide resources to help them manage stress? I know Michigan State University and many of your organizations, I'm sure, have on your websites resources for employees to help manage stress during these difficult times. Provide ways for people to share ideas and experiences. There are so many platforms for collaboration, right? There's Jamboard and Google Docs and others. So make sure you provide ways for people to share ideas and collaborate informally, as well as formal scheduled virtual meetings. All right, number 3, for remote teams, I strongly encourage you to require schedules. Depending on whose report you're reading, Microsoft reported employees are working 4 more hours a week. Another survey, let's see who this was, NordVPN reports employees are working 3 more hours every day. Please have your teams set work schedules, recognizing that these work schedules are not going to be the typical 8 to 5 that they were before, right? We may have different work hours distributed through the day, but make sure they have work hours that include not only when are you going to start working, but end times. It is just so easy to just keep working. So have them even set an alarm when to stop working and eat lunch, when to stop working for the day. And we need to respect non-work time, right? If someone shares with us that their schedule would be ideal if it was from 10 to 2, I'm not going to send them a 5 a.m. email. I'm going to rigorously discipline myself to respect that non-work time. Clarify expectations and goals. Be realistic, right? Be realistic. Things have changed. I said earlier, recognize accomplishments. That's very validating. And finally, practice empathy. Because no matter who we are, right? We are experiencing a reaction to the COVID-19 pandemic. We probably have good days and bad days, but everyone is experiencing a reaction, ourselves included. So be empathetic, be kind to yourself as well. And recognize, I would love to sit here and tell you that it's just so easy to lead teams during periods of high stress, or to be a member of a team during periods of high stress. And we all know that's not true. Leading teams during periods of high stress takes a lot of emotional energy. right? It takes disciplining ourselves, trusting each other, right? To have good intentions, and a willingness to put the good of the whole over our own self-interest, which doesn't come naturally. But all of these things, if we put forth the effort to do all of these things, will help us build high-performing teams where we have trust within the team. And one thing I do want to say, pay attention to how you're reacting just by virtue of our positions, just by virtue of our positions. People pay attention to our words and our actions and add meaning. So if you're always sad and this is terrible and we're never going to know if my kid's going to go back to school and it's just awful, if you're always sad and depressed, people are going to think that's the appropriate way to respond, right? We see that. People often follow your lead. Right? So you also don't want to be the screaming hyena who comes to work and, just totally loses it and screaming. We don't get to do that. What you really want is to be, calm and not looking through rose-colored glasses, but confident that we can get through this, that it will get better and there will be a new normal, and that we can be successful. And with that, I thank you very much. I had forgotten to I got so excited to go over the content earlier that I skipped right over my introduction slide, particularly because, or I should say also because, Dave and Marcy did such a nice job introducing me, and I thank you both for your kind words. But I do want to take just a moment, if I may, and say, if you have any follow-up questions for me, please feel free to reach out for me. Marcy, could I get you perhaps to in the chat so everyone can see it? Could I get you to put my email address?
Yes, I will do that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And with that, let me say, as a reminder, some key points. It's a VUCA world. Recognize that, right? Communicate, lead by example, take those 5 steps. And as an additional step, I encourage you to attend one of the upcoming programs offered by the Broad College of Business. And with that, I thank you all very, very much. Marcy, I'm going to turn it over to you for questions.
I am still chuckling about the screaming hyena, and I picture that sometimes when I see those emails that make me feel that way. So I'm going to just blow the order of questions I had and jump right to one that says, is it wise to do yoga in the morning with your team? So this viewer, I think, is asking about what are some of those best practices we can do to be mindful of our team right now.
Absolutely. And I think that's dependent upon the team. So what is a best practice is to make it available, right? So say, we're going to do this, right? At whatever time your team's going to get together in the morning and we're going to have 30 minutes of yoga, but make it voluntary rather than mandatory. Some people might not be as flexible as others. There might be some health reasons that somebody can't participate, but absolutely making that an option. It's a nice way to build that sense of community, to help people feel like we're together for more than just getting the job done. So excellent question.
This question is about schooling in the fall, in the complexity and the implications of that. You know, a lot of schools in Michigan, or many, have announced that they will start the year with online-only classes for children. This impacts some parents more than others. So this person actually submitted this question to me yesterday in anticipation of your presentation today.
Nice.
She is deciding now, how does she balance her work, changing to a part-time schedule, so she can teach her children in the morning? You know, this impacts her career, her personal financial situation. If you were her leader, what would you do to support her both now and as children do return to school full-time on site?
Mm-hmm. Another excellent question. And what I would do is have a one-on-one conversation with you, frankly, and say, what hours is your kid in class, right? And if it's multiple children, what hours are your children in class? can we schedule meetings around those times? Right? Because oftentimes other kinds of work can be done when you've made an assignment for your child. The child is working out that math problem or that set of math problems. So you could be processing something, but be really clear about, I don't want you to feel like you're being pulled in any more directions than you already are. So let's talk about when would be an ideal time for meetings, right? This might be, as I said, during the lunch hour, might be maybe if school ends at, when does school end these days? I have grandkids, so I don't remember. 2:33 maybe? So maybe the workday starts, we don't schedule meetings before 4. I did another session on a different topic, and the whole topic was literally, how do we manage the fact that the lines between working and our private personal lives is just, those barriers are gone, the lines are blurred. And one of the things that seems to be working, I haven't done any research on this, so this is anecdotal, folks, but that seems to be working. Really make sure that you're establishing a structured schedule. So the kids get up, you feed them breakfast, and then spend quality time with them, not while you're trying to do 3 other things, but really some quality one-on-one, get them started in your schoolwork, doing those things, assigning those topics, and then perhaps carve out an hour for yourself, right? You need to take time for yourself. We are often so busy worrying about everybody else that we're forgetting that doing nothing is important for creativity, it's important for performance, and it's important for our own mental health.
You're getting thanks already in the Q&A for that answer. So thank you for providing that. That was very reassuring and practical. So this question talks about or addresses differing perspectives. So you mentioned that people have different perspectives even after experiencing the same situation. You proved your point with that poll. Some of us wrote down words that weren't even there because we tend to fill in context. Many of us have wanted now to revisit the perspective of our team members to see what we may have missed.
Yes.
Some of us have been in relationships for some time with some team members. What's a good way that we can approach each team member, even though those we've known for a while, to learn how their perspectives may differ from our own?
Talk to them. And that comes across, I know that came across flippant, and I didn't intend it to, but seriously, it is once, I'm going to skip back. Excuse me, I know it's in here somewhere. If I remembered where it was, I could have gone right back to that slide, so excuse me, okay? Not this one, okay? We have developed a relationship with that team person, right? With whomever that is on our team. And then with the dramatic change from work to working from home, right? That relationship has, without a doubt, changed somewhat. That's a way that you can frame the conversation. So it doesn't feel awkward like, oh, this is touchy-feely, or it doesn't feel awkward like, why did I do something wrong? No, it's just acknowledging that we are now communicating through the technology, all of the informal conversations that we used to have just without even thinking about them. Opportunities for those are gone. So I just want to check in and get your perspective. Say that, and then stop talking and listen. Oftentimes people are at first a little taken aback, right? So you want to allow at least a 3 count in your head before you jump in and say anything else, because the person has to think about, wow, I'm being asked, and what do I want to say, and then begin to say it. So seriously, just talk with them. You might, as I think about this, you might even give them a heads up. You know, I just want to do a check-in with everybody, see what you're thinking, see how you're doing, what time would work best for you. And I would encourage you to have this be a virtual meeting so that you can see each other. Right? You can look in each other's eyes, as it were, if you're adept at looking at the green dot on your computer, to make it feel much more validating, because we can get that nonverbal feedback.
There's a couple of questions that are asking about the frequency of something like that. and the correct setting, which you started to talk about doing it virtually, but is there a recommendation you have for how many people should be in that meeting, or how to handle that type of a conversation so that you're soliciting feedback from each person?
If I'm soliciting feedback from each person and I'm really trying to see how our individual team members doing, there are 2 people in that virtual meeting, right? The individual and me. So there's 2 people in that meeting, because I want people to feel comfortable being honest and forthright. And oftentimes there are team dynamics that can make things feel just a little awkward. Okay, so I would suggest those be one-on-one conversations. Now, if you're trying to say instead, how is the team doing? Then get the team together and talk about how are we doing. And I would structure this using an appreciative inquiry approach, meaning that we talk and start first with what's going well. So want to see how everybody's doing? Let's talk about what's going well. What has been working for you, right, since we've been working from home? Sharing those successes, starting with positives, allows us to learn ideas or gain ideas from each other. And it also sets a very different tone. If you pull the team together and say, oh my gosh, this is so awful, what's going wrong? It sets a very different tone, and I strongly encourage you not to do that. And if part of that question, Marcy, if I'm remembering correctly, was about frequency.
Correct.
Okay, I would encourage you to check in at least weekly with your team. And that's not to say in depth, you know, how are we doing? What's your perspective? But literally check in. How are you doing? Right? What's going well? Do you have everything you need? At least once a week. Now, if you have somebody who's new, like I have a colleague, as you know, Marcy, who started during the work from home, during the pandemic. She started, so she needs, as is reasonable for a new employee, more frequent check-ins. Until she learns how to do some of these things, I'm checking in with her 3-4 times a week. And her first about month, I checked in every day because she was brand new and didn't know. We want people to feel like they belong, okay? And that they can be heard if there's this beginning to feel like I'm isolated. So at least once a week.
And you talked about onboarding a new team member. What about creating a new team in this environment when there's a major effort that's initiated and several of those team members have never met in person? What recommendations do you have for getting cohesiveness and decision-making among that kind of a team?
Absolutely. Let me see if I can find the slide on, I don't even know where it was, this one, there we go. What you're doing, what you're describing is at the forming stage. And there are very specific things that leaders can do during the forming stage. First of all, have a Zoom meeting or Teams or whatever your platform is that you're using, and have everybody have their cameras on. Make sure that they put their names as they really are in the participant list. So Marcy, I'm looking at you, I see your name. If instead you had a nickname that I was unfamiliar with that you didn't go by at work, that would be confusing for me. Or if you were logged in by phone, right? Yeah. So get the team together, have them put their real names so people can see each other. And then you as the leader, introduce each team member, stressing what their strengths are. It's validating, and it also helps the team figure out, all right, so if I just found out that Marcy and Caitlin are really good at the technology. Well, now that I know that as a team member, if I'm struggling, I know who I can reach out to, right? So bring them together, conduct introductions, highlighting each team member's strengths. Let them know that there will be a rocky period. It is important to let team members know that we are not going to just jump in and be highly performing right now. There is an expectation that happened, or that happens. It's not the way it works. We need to go through a period of time where we might have some struggles, getting to know each other, deciding who's going to do what. And that's another important piece of this stage when you're bringing together a new team. having the team identify what specifically is going to be each of our roles in this team, and how are we going to collaborate? How often are we going to have Zoom meetings? How often are we going to use other tools for collaboration? Encourage the team to develop team norms. And by that, I mean literally things like, how are we going to manage conflict? Because it will arise. So this can be things like, we will challenge ideas, not people, right? We will always, if everybody's nodding and agreeing, oh yeah, good idea, which happens in teams because everybody wants to go along so that we can get to performing, right? If everybody's nodding their head and agreeing, it is somebody's role, okay, to take the alternative point of view, to say, let me just play devil's advocate here for a moment, right? To take that opposing point of view and let them know that there's no sort of timeline or speed at which we go through these. We go back and forth, but through each stage, be intentional about maintaining open communications.
Would you please share your thoughts on, now that the team is formed or we're in existing teams, what's the best approach to decision making in a distributed work environment?
It really depends on the kind of decision and the information that the leader holds, right? Sometimes there are decisions that are most appropriate for the leader to make unilaterally. If the leader has all of the information, it's unlikely that there will be resistance or lack of commitment to the decision. Then the leader can make that decision unilaterally. Many times when we're on a team, we need collaborative decision making. That's where the power of the team comes in, right? Because it's the expertise, the insight, and the perspectives of all of the team members. So to make decisions when we have a distributed team like this, there are lots of options. You can just have conversations like this. I like to use something called affinity diagrams and multi-voting. You're nodding, Marcy, so you must be familiar. And affinity diagrams, you just have people identify, if we're talking, in fact, I did this with an organization trying to set their upcoming strategic goals for the upcoming year. And I had the leadership team on, this was not in Zoom, but I had them write down on sticky notes, right? One idea, what's the most important goal per sticky note? And then we group these together and headings emerge so that we see what those most important things are. So whatever the decision is you're working on. To do this via distance technology, Jamboard works really well. Google Docs works really well. So it's really just a matter of being intentional and bringing folks together so they can share their ideas, prioritize. But then to the multi-voting, you need to decide, and this would be done during the norming stage, how are we going to make decisions? Is it majority rules? If that's the case, you've identified everyone's ideas, grouped them together into reasonable headings, and then each member gets to vote. But you need to decide in advance, sort of, how are we going to do this? And Marcy, something that you do at the start of each of these sessions is really important here. You want to make sure that the technology is not getting in the way. I will tell you, the first time, I won't tell you the name of the collaborative platform I was using, but the first time I had to use it, there were, how many of us were there? There were 25 of us in this virtual room, and we were all going to go to these breakout rooms and share our ideas to do exactly what I was just sharing with you. I couldn't get in. Needless to say, I just couldn't. Right? So needless to say, the group went ahead and participated, and I didn't feel like a part of that because I literally could not access the platform, couldn't log in and participate. So if you're going to use some of these different systems that are available, do like Marcy did. Make sure that the technology does not become a barrier. Introduce pieces as you go along.
Yeah, it's so important to do the work in advance so that the focus is on you, your expertise, on what people are learning. So that's a really important element that we build into all our programming and events, that the technology is not really noticed, other than it's kind of fun to do a poll. You know, I want that to be the only memory. So teams are under high stress, you know, and people have a lot going on in their worlds right now, that the blur between work and life and elder care and child care and staying fit and doing a good job at work, it's quite difficult right now. And there's an impact on many, you know, as we adjust to this new level of pressure or differing pressure. So this person, Susan, asks a question concerning one of her people that work for her. She says, how do you help a subordinate let go of outdated processes so our firm can move forward efficiently in the time of COVID?
Yeah, that is a amazingly good question, very insightful. And I say amazingly good because I think the fact that you're thinking about it shows insight. Here's how this works. All of the changes that have occurred, those are external to us. But in order to move on, we have to make psychological transitions. And these psychological transitions occur in 3 stages. And the first is endings. We have to come to terms with the fact that the old ways are gone. Please recognize that a loss, I have lost my office, right? I am now working from home. I have lost the ability to have time where I'm at work and not being pulled in 27 directions, whatever. There's a loss associated with all of this change that's going on right now. And part of processing that, making the psychological transition through processing that, is grief. Just like when we're experiencing grief for other kinds of losses. And you probably will see this. First, there's denial. Right? It's not a big deal. We'll be back. And we might work through even being somewhat depressed and saying, well, I can't even get up in the morning. Right? Then there's this bargaining stage where, if you please just let me do X, right? If you just let me do X, before we get to acceptance. And this is a process that people go through at different stages. Acknowledge that it's real. Right? You don't want to let people sort of get stuck in this. One of the things that you want to make sure you don't say is, get over it, move on, right? Because that is invalidating. Recognize the old, outdated ways that this person is hanging on to, okay, probably had a big impact on their sense of identity. If you'll recall the 3 objectives of communication, I might have been very adept at doing my job when I was at the work site, but now I don't do it very well, even if it's just because my internet access is unstable, right? Our sense of identity is threatened. So acknowledge that this is real, but that we are going to get through it. We can get through this together, because then once you sort of help them get through that ending stage, recognizing that the old ways are gone, right? And you can't force that. It's so tempting to force that, and you just can't force that. You have to provide reassurance that you'll get through it, because then the person will get to what's called the neutral zone. And the neutral zone is where the old ways, okay, that's gone, and that's not working anymore, because it is literally, in many cases, gone, right? The office is not a place I can be anymore. So the old ways aren't working, but I haven't figured out how to become adept at the new processes yet. So during this neutral zone, I'm going to need a bit more reassurance, perhaps even send me to an online training program, whatever's relevant given the specific situation. And sometimes I've had to actually say, it looks like you are unwilling to believe that this is going to happen. It's going to happen. I want you to be successful, okay? Recognizing the implication being that if you can't be successful, that's a different conversation, right? That's a different conversation. And sometimes, well, I'm sure, Marcy, you haven't been at university long enough, but I'll bet Keith and Dave have. Many years ago, we switched to an enterprise business system. And some people simply were unable to adapt and they retired. That's okay, right? That's okay. Because for those of us who do work through that neutral zone, then that's when we get to the new beginnings. And then there's excitement. Like I have told you, Marcy, I didn't think I could teach via Zoom that day in March when I was told you don't get to go back to the classroom, right, starting right now. But now I'm excited by it and all of the things that we can do with it, like the polls, like breakout rooms when I'm teaching an academic class. Okay. So it's a process. Be empathetic, okay? Be supportive and help the person move through those processes.
I have a question about indirect reports from a leader, and then I'm going to ask a question about taking care of yourself as a leader.
Okay.
So the question about indirect reports says, we're talking about communicating, checking in with employees frequently. Does this include indirect reports that you wouldn't normally talk to in the office? What are your recommendations when it comes to indirect reports?
Mm-hmm. I think it is important to check in periodically because just seeing you is no longer possible, right? It need not be every week, but I would say at least on a monthly basis, it's have some kind of check-in. Because, well, I guess the question for me now, Marcy, is when we say indirect reports, I'm assuming there is someone who is that person's immediate supervisor who's
Correct.
checking in on a weekly basis.
Correct.
Okay, as long as that's there, then I would say at least on a monthly basis, just so that people know you're still around. Right? It's interesting when there's lack of contact, when we don't see someone. First of all, we can forget, right? That, oh yeah, I remember her. But also, we as humans are hardwired to perceive threats in our environment. We have a little, I'm doing it like this, like it's huge. It's not. It's a very tiny little brain structure called our amygdala, which causes us to find threats in the environment. In the workplace, threats are often perceived as someone having negative motivations. So for example, if the person, I haven't seen them, since March, haven't heard from them since March, I don't know what's going on. The only thing I'm finding out about our organization reopening is what I'm reading in the news. All of those things cause us to engage in what's called negative attribution. We add negative meanings or motivations to people, and the less frequently we encounter those people, the easier it is to do that. So for lots of reasons, you still want to be visible and have periodic check-ins with those indirect reports.
The picture you showed of the brain caused a person to recognize that they were working overdrive, that their brain was working overdrive. What's your most effective strategy to get out of that space and to get back into that lead by example, creative, calm, professional, helpful space?
Yep. Schedule time to stop working and do nothing. Right? Because it can feel, and I know that's hard. I struggle with this, which is why I literally have an alert on my phone that tells me I need to go for a walk. Right? You have to find time for yourself to just think of nothing. And oftentimes, at least for myself, I will only speak for myself, oftentimes I feel like I should be doing something. So I have had to reframe that for myself, that taking a walk or going, just sitting out in the backyard, getting some fresh air, that is doing something. That's giving my brain a break so that I can get back to engaging effectively in that higher order thinking and creativity and empathy and those things. But seriously, I'm going to say this again. Schedule times for yourself to not be working. And I don't mean and doing the dishes or vacuuming. I mean taking time for yourself. Breathe. Do that yoga someone else asked about. Something for yourself.
There's many more questions I wanted to ask you from the viewers, and we have run right to the time that we need to wrap up. So as we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts in the last minute or so to share with us before we go today?
Yes, there will be a new normal, and we can all be successful in the new normal if we take care of ourselves and practice empathy with others and communicate.
Thank you so much. I made a note while you were talking about, you said a plan for a desirable future, which echoes what you just said. And that was so inspiring. You were so helpful today with your tips and bringing a little humor and light and optimism into what's a difficult thing to do. So thank you so much for your time today, for being so generous with us and offering this for, you know, each of those that are alums of MSU and everyone that is finding out and joining us. So thank you. And for those that are watching, thank you for joining us. Take care and be well. We will see you hopefully in a week.
Absolutely. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Marcy.